Rena had been working at the Thompson household for almost 2 years. She arrived early in the morning, when the sun was just beginning to peek over the rooftops, and often left late in the evening after the house had been quiet for hours. She didn't complain. She knew her family back home depended on her. Her father had passed away when she was young, leaving her mother to care for her and her younger brother and sister. Life had been hard, and Rena had learned early that she needed to be strong, responsible, and patient. She had dreams, yes, dreams of studying music again, of playing in a hall filled with people who appreciated her talent. But for now, her reality was cleaning, cooking, and making sure the Thompson house ran smoothly. The Thompsons were a wealthy family living in a large house in the city. The walls were decorated with expensive paintings. The floors shone like mirrors, and the chandeliers hung from the ceilings like glittering jewels. Rena often admired the beauty of the house, but never allowed herself to be distracted. She had her work to do, and she did it quietly, efficiently, and without complaint. The family treated her politely enough, but she was invisible most of the time, a shadow moving around the edges of their lives. Rena's favorite part of the house was the music room. It was on the second floor, with tall windows that let in the afternoon sunlight. In the corner stood a grand piano, polished to perfection, its keys gleaming. Rena would sometimes linger outside the room when she had a moment to herself, listening to the faint echoes of music from the radio or imagining the songs she wished she could play. She had studied piano as a child, and though she had been forced to give up formal lessons after her father's death, her fingers remembered the keys. Music was a part of her, a quiet companion in her life of chores and routine. One Thursday morning, the house was buzzing with unusual energy. Mr. Thompson had announced that his son, Adrian, was throwing a party that evening. Adrian was a teenager, full of energy, mischief, got a kind of confidence that came from knowing he could do almost anything without consequence. His friends would be coming over, and the house would be filled with laughter, music, and noise. Rena had been informed that she would be responsible for preparing the food, arranging the living room, and making sure that everyone stayed out of places they shouldn't go. She nodded politely, hiding the small sigh that escaped her. Parties meant long hours, extra work, and watching people who barely noticed her enjoy themselves as the day went on, Rena moved quietly around the house. She prepared sandwiches, cut fruits neatly, arranged drinks in a crystal pitcher, and made sure the rooms were spotless. She even rearranged the chairs so that the guests would have plenty of space to sit, all the while keeping an ear out for the faint thump of music or laughter that would signal Adrian's arrival. She worked quickly and efficiently, but a small part of her mind kept wandering back to the piano. She had played in front of audiences before, in school recitals and local events. But now the piano remained silent, untouched by anyone in the house. She felt a strange mix of longing and fear whenever she looked at it. By late afternoon, the first guests began to arrive. Adrian's friends were loud, boisterous, and full of teenage bravado. They ran around the house, calling out to each other, tossing jackets on the furniture and laughing as if the world belonged entirely to them. Rena moved among them like a ghost, unnoticed unless they needed something. She served drinks, refilled plates, and cleaned up spilled juice with quiet efficiency. No one spoke to her more than a few words, and she didn't mind. She was used to being ignored, used to blending into the background. Adrian, however, seemed to enjoy her quiet presence in a way that made her nervous. He would call her over sometimes, asking her to bring something, and then smirk when she looked at him with polite confusion. "Hurry up, Rena," he said once, laughing when she almost tripped over a rug while carrying a tray. Rena's cheeks burned, but she kept her composure, silently wishing the evening would pass without incident. She didn't understand why Adrian seemed to take pleasure in making her uneasy, but she had learned long ago not to argue, not to complain. As the night went on, the music in the living room grew louder. Someone had brought a guitar, and Adrian's friends had begun singing along. The atmosphere was lively, filled with jokes, laughter, and playful teasing. Rena tried to remain unnoticed, moving from room to room, making sure everything was in order. She felt like a shadow in a house full of light, and she was content with it. Her hands were tired from the work and her back ached. But there was a quiet satisfaction in knowing that everything was perfect for the guests. Then, Adrian walked into the room where she was arranging glasses. He had a mischievous grin on his face, one that made her heart sink slightly. "Hey, Rena," he said loudly, drawing the attention of his friends. "Why don't you play something for us? Come on, let's see what you've got." Rena froze. Her hands tightened around the glasses she was holding. She opened her mouth to refuse to say she didn't play anymore, but before she could speak, Adrian laughed and added, "Come on, it'll be funny. I bet you don't even know how to touch the keys properly." The room erupted into laughter. The guests turned toward her, curious, their eyes shining with amusement and anticipation. Rena felt her stomach drop. She wanted to disappear, to melt into the floor. Her mind raced. She remembered the piano, the music room, the songs she used to play. She remembered the countless hours she had spent practicing, the joy and comfort that music had brought her. And yet fear held her back. These were strangers, people who barely knew her. What if she made a mistake? What if they laughed at her? She felt a sharp pang of embarrassment and anxiety, but somewhere deep inside, a small voice whispered that she could do it, that she should not let fear control her. With a deep breath, Rena set the glasses down carefully and walked toward the music room. The room was bright with light from the tall windows, the polished piano gleaming as if waiting for her. She placed her hands on the keys, feeling the familiar smoothness beneath her fingers. The laughter from the living room seemed distant now, replaced by a quiet anticipation that only she could feel. Her heart raced, but for the first time that evening, she felt a spark of something else dash excitement. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the memories of music wash over her. She remembered her teacher's kind face, the encouragement she had received as a child, the pride of playing a piece perfectly in front of an audience. She remembered her father, who had always told her that music was a gift, a way to touch people's hearts. She opened her eyes, looked at the keys, and let her fingers move. The first notes were soft, almost tentative, but they held a clarity and beauty that surprised even her. As she continued, the melody grew stronger, richer, more confident. The music flowed naturally, as if it had been waiting inside her all this time for the right moment to emerge. She didn't think about the guests, about Adrian, about the laughter that had drawn her here. She thought only of the music, of the story she was telling with her fingers, of the emotion that poured out through each note. From the living room, the laughter died down. Guests paused in mid-conversation, their attention drawn to the sound of the piano. The music was mesmerizing, filled with a depth and beauty that no one had expected. Adrian and his friends exchanged glances, their faces showing shock and disbelief. The playful smirk on Adrian's face faded, replaced by a mix of awe and confusion. How could someone so quiet, so overlooked, create something so powerful? Rena continued to play, lost in the music. She felt a strange freedom, a joy she hadn't known in years. The world outside the piano seemed to disappear. She was no longer a maid, no longer invisible, no longer a background presence in someone else's life. She was herself, fully, completely, expressing a part of her that had been hidden for far too long. Each note told a story of her struggles, her dreams, her losses, and her hopes. She poured everything she had into the music, letting it speak for her when words could not. By the time she finished, the room was silent. The guests stared at her, unsure of what to do, their faces reflecting a mixture of admiration, surprise, and wonder. Adrian's mouth hung open slightly as if he had lost the ability to speak. Slowly, applause began to fill the room, hesitant at first, then louder and louder. People clapped, cheered, and some even whistled. Rena's cheeks flushed with a mixture of pride and embarrassment. She had never played for an audience like this. And yet here she was, being recognized not for her work as a maid, but for the gift she had carried inside her all these years. Rena stepped back from the piano, her hands trembling slightly. She had expected laughter, mockery, maybe a polite clap at best. She had not expected this. She looked at the faces around her and saw genuine appreciation, amazement, and respect. For the first time in a long time, she felt truly seen. Adrian's expression shifted as well. He looked at her with something that resembled regret, perhaps realizing that his joke had underestimated her in the most unexpected way. That night, Rena returned to her room after the party, exhausted but exhilarated. She lay on her bed, thinking about what had happened. The piano, the music, the reaction of the guest, it all felt like a dream, yet it was real. She realized something important. Her talent, her passion, and her perseverance were part of her identity, and no one could take that away. She had always been quiet, always been overlooked, but tonight she had spoken without words, and the world had listened. And so, even though the work would continue, and even though she would remain a maid in the household for now, Rena carried with her a new sense of confidence and hope. She knew that one day her music would reach more ears, touch more hearts, and perhaps change her life forever. But for now, she cherished this moment, this first glimpse of recognition, and the realization that sometimes the world could be surprised by those who had quietly waited in the shadows, ready to shine when the right moment came. The evening had taken a turn that Rena could never have predicted. What had started as a normal night of work had become something extraordinary. She had played the piano in front of Adrian's friends, and their reaction had been more than she could ever have imagined. But now, with the party still in full swing, she was unsure how to return to her role as the quiet maid. The laughter and chatter in the living room continued, though the occasional pause revealed the lingering awe from her performance. Adrian's friends whispered to each other, their faces glowing with excitement. Some pulled out their phones, replaying parts of the video they had captured. Rena could see their fingers scrolling quickly, trying to get another glimpse of the music she had just played. She felt a mixture of pride and unease. She had never wanted attention like this. She had simply wanted to play, to let the music speak for her. Adrian, meanwhile, was pacing near the piano, his earlier smugness replaced by a strange tension. He glanced at Rena with a half-smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I didn't know you could actually play like that," he muttered under his breath, more to himself than to anyone else. His friends laughed, teasing him about underestimating the maid. "Looks like our little joke backfired," one of them said, shaking his head. Rena, hearing the whispers, felt her stomach twist slightly. She had expected mockery, but instead, she was facing admiration and curiosity. One of the guests, a young man named Victor, approached her cautiously. "That was incredible," he said quietly, as if speaking too loudly would shatter the magic of the moment. "I've never heard anyone play like that." Rena lowered her eyes, unsure how to respond. Compliments had never been easy for her. She had always been the one giving service, helping others, and staying out of sight. To be praised so openly made her feel exposed in a way she wasn't used to. Adrian, noticing the attention she was receiving, felt a strange combination of guilt and amazement. He had meant for the moment to be funny, a way to make Rena uncomfortable in front of his friends. But now, seeing the genuine admiration, he realized he had completely misjudged her. He cleared his throat, attempting to regain some control of the situation. "All right," he said loudly, trying to sound casual. "That was, okay, pretty good, I guess." His tone lacked the usual teasing edge, and his friends immediately noticed. They laughed, but it was a nervous kind of laughter. It's a kind that happens when you are unsure how to respond to someone far better than expected. Rena felt a shiver of discomfort. She hadn't intended to show off. She had simply played the music that lived inside her, and yet here she was suddenly at the center of attention, and the thought made her uneasy. She tried to move back toward the kitchen, hoping to resume her duties, to vanish from the gaze of the room. But before she could take more than a step, Adrian's voice stopped her. "Wait," he said, his tone softer this time, almost hesitant. Do you know any other pieces?" The question was simple, but it carried a weight that Rena hadn't expected. It was not mocking, not challenging. It was curious. She paused, fingers brushing against the polished wood of the piano, and considered her answer. She could have refused, walked away, and returned to her chores. But something inside her pushed her forward. The music room felt like a safe space, a place where she could be herself, even if only for a few minutes. "Yes," she said quietly, almost as if she were talking to herself. "I know a few more." She did not look at Adrian or the guests. She simply began to play again, letting the melody flow naturally. The piece she chose was one she had loved as a child, a complex arrangement that required both precision and emotion. Her fingers danced across the keys, creating a sound that was both powerful and delicate. Commanding attention without demanding it, the room grew quiet almost immediately. Guests stopped talking mid-laugh, phones were lowered, and even Adrian seemed to forget to breathe. The music filled every corner of the house, weaving through the laughter, the chatter, and the occasional clink of glasses. It was as if the piano itself had become a living thing, telling a story that no one could ignore. Rena closed her eyes, letting the notes guide her, letting the emotions she had kept buried for so long pour into every chord. For Rena, the music was more than just sound. It was freedom. It was memory. It was the voice she had never allowed herself to fully use. She thought of her father, who had always encouraged her to play, who had believed in her talent when no one else did. She thought of her mother, working tirelessly to keep their family afloat. She thought of her siblings, who would never know the long hours she spent practicing in secret, the sacrifices she had made to support them. Every note carried a piece of her life, every melody a fragment of her story. From the living room, the reaction was immediate and electric. Guests were on the edge of their seats, mesmerized by the beauty and emotion of the music. Some whispered to each other, unable to believe that someone so young, someone they had barely noticed before, could create such a sound. Adrian's friends exchanged looks of shock and awe, their earlier jokes and laughter completely forgotten. Even the adults who had attended the party were leaning forward, listening intently, their expressions a mixture of surprise and admiration. Adrian, standing near the piano, felt a strange lump in his throat. He had always thought of Rena as quiet, unassuming, someone who belonged in the background. He had never imagined that she could possess such extraordinary talent. The realization made him feel both guilty and amazed. He had meant to embarrass her, to make her the subject of a harmless joke, but instead, he had uncovered a hidden brilliance he could not ignore. When Rena finally finished the piece, the room remained silent for a moment, as if no one wanted to break the spell. Then, slowly, applause began to rise. It started as a quiet clapping from a few guests, then grew louder until the entire room was cheering. Some people whistled, others clapped their hands together, and a few even stood up to show their appreciation. Rena's cheeks flushed with a mixture of embarrassment and pride. She had never experienced anything like this before, and the intensity of the moment left her breathless. Victor, the young man who had approached her earlier, stepped forward once more. "That was amazing," he said, his eyes wide with admiration. "I've never heard anyone play like that." "You're incredible." Rena lowered her gaze, murmuring a quiet thank you, unsure how to respond to such praise. She had spent so long living in the shadows, serving others quietly, that receiving recognition like this felt both overwhelming and surreal. Adrian, feeling the weight of the situation, cleared his throat again. I'm sorry," he said softly, almost to himself. I didn't think he'd trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. His friends nudged him, teasing him lightly, but he ignored them. For the first time, he seemed genuinely sincere. Recognizing that his attempt at humor had been misplaced, Rena, sensing the shift in the room, felt a small flicker of confidence. She had never sought attention or praise, but now she understood the power of her talent. Music was not just a personal joy. It was a bridge that connected her to others, a way to communicate emotions that words could never fully capture. The realization gave her a sense of strength she had not felt in years. As the evening continued, more guests approached her, asking questions about her training, the pieces she played, and how she had learned so much at such a young age. Rena answered politely, sharing bits of her story, but keeping the more personal details to herself. She spoke of her love for music, of the hours she had spent practicing, and of the joy it brought her. Each answer seemed to further captivate the listeners, who were eager to learn more about the quiet maid who had transformed the party with her talent. Adrian watched from a distance, a mixture of awe and guilt swirling inside him. He had never considered Rena in this light before. He had never imagined that someone he saw as a servant could possess such extraordinary skill and depth. The experience forced him to reconsider his own assumptions, to recognize the hidden potential in people he had overlooked. It was a lesson he would not soon forget. Meanwhile, Rena's thoughts wandered. She considered the possibilities that had been opened to her by this unexpected moment. Perhaps one day she could return to formal lessons, perform in front of larger audiences, and fully embrace the music that had been her constant companion. But for now, she focused on the present, savoring the unexpected recognition and the feeling of being truly seen. The party continued, late into the night. But for Rena, the evening had already changed everything. She moved among the guests with a newfound sense of confidence, no longer just a background presence. Even when she returned to her chores, arranging plates or cleaning up spills, she carried herself differently, aware that she had a talent that could not be ignored. The piano had given her a voice. The applause had confirmed that she had been heard by the time the last guests had left. Rena was exhausted, but her heart was full. She sat quietly in the music room for a few moments, reflecting on the night's events. The piano stood before her, silent now, but still shimmering in the dim light. She ran her fingers over the keys gently, remembering the melodies she had played, the reactions she had received, and the way her life had shifted in just a few hours. Rena knew that life would not suddenly become easy. She would still work hard, support her family, and navigate the challenges of her everyday life. But she also knew that something had changed inside her. She had been seen, recognized, and appreciated for her true self. And that recognition would give her strength for the days to come. She had discovered that even in a world that often overlooked her, her talent could shine, and that the world could be surprised by someone who had quietly waited in the shadows. The next morning, the house felt quieter than usual. Rena moved through it almost mechanically, cleaning the breakfast dishes, wiping the counters, and arranging the living room. The events of the previous night replayed in her mind, each memory bringing a mixture of pride and disbelief. She had never imagined that a simple joke could turn into something so extraordinary, and yet it had. Her fingers itched for the piano, for the melodies that had filled the room, and for the expression that had poured out of her without hesitation. Adrian appeared in the kitchen, looking awkward. He avoided eye contact at first, busying himself with pouring a glass of juice. But finally he spoke, his voice softer than usual. "Rena," he began, pausing as if unsure how to continue. "I wanted to say sorry again. Last night, I didn't mean to." Rena looked at him quietly, listening. She had expected apologies before from people who had underestimated her, but his tone was different. It was sincere, tinged with the realization that he had treated her unfairly. She nodded slightly, accepting the apology without words. She did not want to dwell on his mistake, and she certainly did not want to let it define her. The music, not the conflict, was what mattered now. Word of her performance had spread quickly among the family and the household staff. Even the cook and the gardener had heard from someone that the quiet maid had played a piano piece so beautifully that everyone had been shocked. Some of the staff had offered congratulations, while others were still in disbelief, shaking their heads as if trying to convince themselves it had really happened. Rena listened politely, smiling softly, but her mind was elsewhere. She kept thinking about the piano, about the possibility that maybe, just maybe, her life could change. The day continued as usual. Guests from the previous night still lingered in conversation, recalling her performance and praising her talent. Rena stayed in the background as usual, serving tea and tidying up. But something had shifted. The attention she had received had given her a quiet confidence. She moved with a new awareness, her posture straight, her steps deliberate. Even when Adrian glanced at her, there was a hint of respect in his eyes now, recognition of something he had never considered before. Later that afternoon, the family gathered in the living room. Adrian's mother spoke first, her voice curious but kind. "Rena, we heard about your performance last night. It seems you have quite the talent." Rena's cheeks flushed. She had not wanted to make a spectacle, but now she felt the eyes of the family on her, waiting for an answer. She nodded humbly. "I learned to play when I was younger," she said softly. "I studied music before, but I had to stop for family reasons." Adrian's father leaned forward, his expression thoughtful. Family reasons? He asked gently. Rena hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. She did not want pity, and she did not want to appear as if she was asking for anything. But at the same time, she wanted them to understand her. My father passed away, she said quietly. I had to support my mother and my siblings' music. Became something I could not fully pursue, but it has always been a part of me. There was a pause, a silence filled with understanding. The family members looked at her differently now, no longer as just the maid, but as a young woman with a story, a talent, and a history. Adrian sat silently, processing what he had heard. The teasing, the jokes, the assumption that she was only there to serve it all, seemed wrong now. He realized that his behavior had been careless, even hurtful. He felt a pang of regret, not just for the joke the night before, but for all the times he had treated her as invisible. Rena returned to her tasks, but her mind kept returning to the piano. She thought about the possibility of playing again, of letting her music be heard beyond the walls of the Thompson house. The memory of last night's applause, the expressions of surprise and admiration, lingered in her mind. It had been overwhelming, yes, but it had also been liberating. She had experienced something rare: recognition, validation, and the joy of sharing her passion. By late afternoon, Adrian approached her again. He seemed unsure, hesitant, but determined. Rena, he said softly, would you? Could you play again? I mean, if you want to, of course. Rena looked at him surprised. She did not expect him to ask. It was one thing to perform in front of a crowd, but another to be invited, genuinely, to play again. She considered his words carefully, then nodded. Yes, she said quietly. I can play. They walked together to the music room. The piano stood there, silent but waiting, a polished witness to her talent. Rena ran her fingers over the keys, feeling the familiar smoothness beneath her touch. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the memory of last night's performance fill her mind. Then she began to play. The first notes were soft, tentative, as if she were testing the waters. But as she continued, the music grew in confidence and beauty. She played a piece that was both complex and emotional, a composition that told a story without words. Each note carried a piece of her past, her struggles, her hopes, and her dreams. The melody flowed naturally, filling the room with a presence that was both gentle and powerful. Adrian watched, captivated. He had never seen this side of Rena before, never realized the depth of her talent. It was not just skill that impressed him. It was the emotion, the connection, the way she seemed to pour herself into every note. He felt a mixture of admiration and guilt, recognizing that he had underestimated her for far too long. As the music continued, Rena began to lose herself in the performance. The room faded away, leaving only the piano and her connection to it. She remembered her father's encouragement, the long hours of practice she had endured as a child, and the dreams she had put aside for her family. Every note was a release, a way to express emotions she had kept hidden for years. She was no longer just a maid. She was a musician, a storyteller, a young woman reclaiming a part of herself. Adrian's friends, who had wandered into the room out of curiosity, stopped in their tracks. They watched in silence, unable to speak, unable to interrupt. The sound of the piano was mesmerizing, filling the space with beauty and intensity. Some pulled out their phones to record, but even they were careful not to disturb the flow of the music. The quiet respect in the room was palpable, a stark contrast to the laughter and joking of the previous night. When Rena finished the piece, there was a moment of silence, a collective pause as everyone absorbed the performance. Then, slowly, applause began. It started as soft clapping, then grew louder, until the entire room was cheering. Victor, who had been watching with admiration, stepped forward once more. That was incredible, he said, his voice filled with awe. You have to play more often. Everyone needs to hear this. Rena smiled softly, feeling a warmth in her chest. She had never sought attention, never aimed to impress anyone, but the recognition felt deeply satisfying. She realized that her music had the power to touch people, to convey emotions that words could not. It was a gift she had kept hidden for too long, and now, for the first time, she was able to share it freely. Adrian, still standing near the piano, felt a complex mix of emotions. He had started the night with a joke, intending to embarrass Rena, but he had discovered something remarkable instead. His misjudgment had led to a revelation, one that changed his perception of her completely. He felt remorse for his earlier behavior, but also a newfound respect. He realized that talent and worth were not determined by social status or visibility, but by the dedication, passion, and heart behind the effort. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur. Guests came and went, each taking a moment to speak with Rena, to ask about her training, and to express their admiration. She answered politely, sharing pieces of her story, but keeping the most personal details private. She wanted to be recognized for her skill, not for her hardships. Though the hardships were an inseparable part of who she was, each conversation reinforced the idea that her music had the power to connect, to bridge gaps between people, and to create moments of shared wonder. By evening, the household was quieter again. Rena returned to her room, exhausted but elated. She sat on her bed, thinking about the events of the day, the reactions of the guests, and the unexpected turn her life had taken. For the first time in years, she felt a sense of possibility. She realized that her talent, her dedication, and her love for music were not things to hide, but things to embrace. The piano had given her a voice, and the world had listened. She knew that challenges remained. She would still work hard, still support her family, and navigate the complexities of life. But something inside her had shifted. She had been seen, truly seen, and that recognition had given her strength. The evening's experience had shown her that sometimes the smallest moments, the simplest choices, could lead to profound change. All it took was courage, patience, and the willingness to let oneself be heard. And so, as Rena lay down that night, her mind replaying the melodies she had played and the faces of those who had listened, she felt a quiet determination. She would continue to practice, to improve, to let her music be heard whenever possible. The world had underestimated her once, but she had proven, in the most beautiful way, that she had a talent that could not be ignored. She closed her eyes, letting the memories of the day soothe her, and drifted into sleep, dreaming of the music that would guide her into the future. The days after the party were unlike anything
Rena had experienced before.
The quiet routines of the Thompson household continued, but an invisible shift had occurred. The way people looked at her had changed, though subtly at first. The staff greeted her with soft smiles and nods, no longer just acknowledging her presence but showing a hint of respect. Adrian, once teasing and careless, seemed quieter, more thoughtful, and sometimes caught himself staring at her as if trying to understand the world he had overlooked for so long. Rena tried to keep her composure, but inside, her mind was a swirl of emotions. The memory of playing in front of so many people, the admiration, the shock, the genuine applause was still fresh. It was both thrilling and terrifying. She had not played to impress anyone, and yet her music had left an impression strong enough to ripple through the household. For the first time in years, she felt a sense of possibility. She allowed herself small, private smiles when she thought about it, feeling the quiet pride that came from being recognized for something that truly mattered to her. The phone in the living room started buzzing more frequently that week. A few guests from the party had shared videos of her performance online, and the attention began to grow. It was strange and disorienting to see people she had never met commenting, praising, and sharing her music. Some wrote about the surprising talent of the quiet Maid, who had transformed an ordinary gathering into something unforgettable. Rena tried not to let it overwhelm her, though she admitted to herself that it was exciting. The world outside the house had begun to notice her, and it was both thrilling and frightening at the same time. One afternoon, while arranging flowers in the living room, Rena heard a soft knock at the door. It was Adrian's mother, holding a warm expression and a notebook in her hand. "Rena," she said gently, "I hope I'm not disturbing you. I just wanted to talk about your music. A few friends of mine have mentioned it, and I think there may be an opportunity for you to pursue it further." Rena froze for a moment, unsure what to say. She had never imagined such a conversation. I don't know," she murmured softly. I play for myself. I never thought anyone would care. Mrs. Thompson shook her head kindly. It's not about vanity. Your talent deserves recognition. You've been through a lot, and your dedication to your family is admirable. But you also deserve the chance to grow, to explore your potential. I think it's time to consider what your music could do for you. Rena's mind raced. She had always dreamed of playing in front of audiences, of attending music school again, but the realities of her life, her responsibilities, her family's needs had kept her from pursuing those dreams. The offer felt like a door opening that she had not dared to knock on. She hesitated, unsure if she was ready to take such a step. But the warmth in Mrs. Thompson's eyes gave her courage. Over the next few days, the conversation spread quietly within the household. The family began to take a more active interest in her talent, suggesting she'd practice more often and even offering to help arrange private lessons. For Rena, this was a revelation. She had been invisible for so long, blending into the background, unnoticed and unremarkable in the eyes of the household. Now she was being recognized, supported, and encouraged. It was a strange feeling, a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. Adrian, too, began to change. He watched her more closely, noticing the care with which she moved, the precision of her actions, and the quiet determination in her eyes. He no longer saw her as someone beneath him or beneath attention. He saw her as someone remarkable, someone with depth and talent he could not have imagined. There was a humility in his demeanor now, a recognition that he had underestimated her in ways he had never realized. One evening, as Rena sat in the music room practicing quietly, Adrian entered without knocking. He stood silently at the doorway, listening to her play a piece she had learned years ago but had not performed for anyone outside her family. The notes were rich and full, carrying a depth of emotion that only came from experience and heartache. When she finished, she turned, surprised to see him standing there, his expression thoughtful. "You're amazing," he said softly, unable to find the words to fully express his admiration. "I didn't realize. I never expected." He trailed off, and Rena simply smiled politely, not wanting to embarrass him with her presence. "You don't have to say anything," she replied softly. "I play because it's part of me. That's all." Adrian nodded, still silent for a moment. I want to apologize," he said. "For the joke? For underestimating you? I didn't see what I should have." "I see it now." Rena's eyes softened. She had not been looking for an apology, but hearing it was oddly comforting. "Thank you," she said. "It means more than you might think." Word of her performance had started to reach beyond the household. A music teacher from a local academy had heard about her through a mutual acquaintance and requested to meet her. The idea of meeting a professional, of having someone formally recognize her talent, was both intimidating and exhilarating. Rena spent hours thinking about it, wondering if she was ready to step into a larger world, one that had always seemed beyond her reach. Finally, the day of the meeting arrived. Rena dressed carefully, choosing clothes that were neat but simple. Her hands trembled slightly as she walked to the local music school, each step filled with anticipation and nervous excitement. The teacher, a kind woman with years of experience, welcomed her warmly and asked to hear her play. Rena sat at the piano, letting the familiar touch of the keys calm her. She began with a piece she had practiced countless times, her fingers moving with confidence and emotion. The teacher listened intently, nodding and occasionally jotting notes. When Rena finished, she looked up, her expression thoughtful. "You have remarkable talent," she said. "You have technique, yes, but more importantly, you have heart. Your music tells a story. You've been through a lot, and it shows in the depth of your playing. You belong on a stage, not just in a household." Rena felt a mixture of pride and disbelief. No one had ever said anything like that to her before. Her parents had encouraged her when she was young, but circumstances had forced her to give up her dreams. To hear such words from a professional, someone who truly understood music, was overwhelming. "I don't know if I'm ready," she admitted quietly. "I've been focused on my family, on work. I've never thought about performing professionally." The teacher smiled gently. "Readiness comes with courage. You've already taken the first step by sharing your music with others. Now it's about choosing to continue, to give yourself the chance you deserve. You have a gift, and the world should hear it. Rena left the music school with a mixture of emotions swirling inside her. Fear, excitement, pride, and hope competed for her attention. She thought about her siblings, her mother, and the life she had worked so hard to maintain. She also thought about the piano in the Thompson house, the applause, and the recognition she had received. A new path was opening before her, and she realized that she had a choice to make. Back at the household, Rena began to practice more frequently, encouraged by both the family and the teacher's words. Each day, she felt her confidence grow. She was no longer just a maid performing duties. She was a musician, a young woman reclaiming a part of herself that had been hidden for too long. Adrian watched from a distance, sometimes lingering near the music room, silently observing, perhaps learning lessons about humility, respect, and the importance of seeing people for who they truly are. The household began to treat her differently. Tasks that were once invisible or taken for granted now came with small gestures of acknowledgement. Guests who had been present at the party sometimes inquired about her progress, eager to hear more of her music. The once quiet maid who moved silently through the house had become someone whose presence carried weight, whose talent was recognized and appreciated. One afternoon, Mrs. Thompson approached Rena with a small notebook. "I thought you might like to start keeping a record of your pieces, your compositions, and your progress," she said. "It's a small step, but it's important. It's about valuing your work, your time, and your talent." Rena accepted it with a quiet smile. She began writing notes about the pieces she practiced, ideas for compositions, and reflections on her performances. It was a small but powerful ritual, a way to take ownership of her growth and to remind herself that her music mattered, not just to the household but to herself. Even Adrian began to show interest in her music. He would occasionally ask questions, no longer teasing, no longer making jokes. He listened when she played, sometimes quietly, sometimes with genuine admiration. Rena noticed the change, and though she did not seek his approval, it was comforting to see someone who had once underestimated her, now recognizing her dedication and skill.